This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Battle Cry: Descent into War. The author is Yami Kafungu. Theo, a 12-year-old boy born into the greatest military mind in French history, Matheo LA Laurentiis, was traumatized by the death of his father during an investigation in Spain. He contemplated suicide before being stopped by his adopted older brother, Jules. Later, he found a book in his father's belongings that contained his contingency plans if all went wrong. After reading it, he found out he had an uncle who knew everything his father knew, so he traveled to find his uncle so he could get revenge for his father. Happy to have Yami join me now here on Speaking of Writers. Yami, welcome to this program.
Thank you. Thank you.
So where did the idea for this story come from?
The idea came from a lot of things, actually. I'm a big anime fan and I'm also a history fan. That's how I came up with the idea. So you take some components of like characters from different animes, books, mangas, and then you take a history portion of it, time, the nights, and you bring it all together. And I don't know, it kind of just formed this idea of like the story that came up in my head. hmm
This character, Theo, is there a lot of you in Theo?
There was a lot of me in Theo. When I was writing Theo, I'm 14 right now, but when I wrote him, I was 12 or 13. Theo is meant to project innocence, like the innocence of a child who does not know much about the world he lives in. So he was much like me, but I've grown a little bit. He's still much like me, I would say, but I'm a little bit more mature than Theo is.
Where did your love of history come from?
At first, it was when I was younger, I was a really big fan of social studies, and I always wanted to travel the world and visit places. And when I came to the US, history became a big thing for me because it was first American history, which I really fell in love with. Then after that, this year in high school, I took world history, and then my love for history only continues to grow. And I did more of my research on European history, medieval, Arabic times, and during the Hebrews and Egyptian times. Yes. So loved history from a very, very young age.
You mentioned a bunch there. Is there one or two that you prefer or love more?
Renaissance time was very interesting for me. I would
Mm.
say I love that. And American history, yeah, like Renaissance time and American history. I find America to be a very fascinating country.
How long have you been in the U.S.?
3 years now.
What was life like growing up you're from Zambia. What was that like, your early young years growing up there?
Um, I was a very well-off kid. I went to a very, very fancy private school. I'd say I was fairly a lot of it. I lived next to my best friend, and I just went about my studies, learning more. I enjoyed learning from a young age. I always tried to find ways to do things. I tried to go outside and walk pretty far from home just to see what I could find. I'd say life back in Zambia was pretty fun. It felt like home, and I wish to go back and visit some family one day.
Yami Kafungu is my guest here on Speaking of Writers. The book is Battle Cry: Descent into War. It came out in January, your first book. Congratulations on that. It is available at writersrepublic.com, amazon.com, and barnesandnoble.com. So tell me the process of writing for you. What was that like?
The process of writing it, well, at first, when I was really young, so I didn't think much of it. It was a school project, but when I was told that it was a bit long, and so I backed out of that competition and I said I want to make it longer. At first, I didn't really know much about writing. I didn't know much about the history I was writing about. It originally took place in the Arabian Peninsula, uh, like way long during like when the first civilizations were being made. It took me a while, but like 4 months into writing, I realized that this is actually like pretty bad. It's actually really bad. So I told myself, okay, we need to. So I scrapped everything, but I kept the main idea and the basis of the characters because that's what I wanted. And then I pushed time a bit forward during beginning the Renaissance to the late medieval ages, and I made things more advanced. I made the characters have a little more depth, give the story a little more structure. I'd say I was probably very, very young. It's not until I actually started diving really deep into my research of what I was writing that I actually grew into a better author. In total, the book took me almost a year to write, but I'd say it was a worth it process. Very difficult, very frustrating from time to time, but it was a very, very worthy process.
Yami, did you use an outline or did you let the story unfold as you were writing it?
I let the story unfold as I was writing it. I already had the idea because before I type things out, I like the idea. I knew what I wanted, but I couldn't just like put it out on the paper because of writer's block and things like that. So it took me like maybe a couple of weeks to a month to actually think about it, not writing, just thinking like this is what I want. I'm sure I want this. I'd say the ideas just kept on flowing and it came together into like this one beautiful set, I can say.
You mentioned writer's block. Did you encounter a lot of writer's block throughout the year writing this book?
Yes, yes, I did. A particular time was when I scrapped everything. That was the first encounter with writer's block I had. I can tell you I really wanted to give up because it was frustrating to think about it. So I didn't write for a week. I just thought, and the ideas just kept flowing back into my head after like a week or two. I'd say writer's block can be very, very stressful a lot of the time. Well, it was for me, but if you give it some time, give yourself time to think, then I think the ideas will just like unfold like a book.
Were there any characters you especially enjoyed writing in this book?
Oh, that's a good one actually. Huh. Any characters I enjoy. I thought about a lot of characters I would write. So Theo's particularly not the main thing I wanted to think about. I plan on writing other book, but this book, Theo wasn't like I know he's the main character, but he wasn't the character. I was like, I really have to focus. He projects innocence, and like I made him innocent. But I'd say Theo was, well, very, very interesting to write, especially during his investigation in Spain, because it was all intense. He was under a secret identity. He was spying around the castle. I'd say that was very, very fun for me to write because he seems like such a mature and important figure that it seems more enjoyable to write because I realized that I could control like what he does. I'd say he was the most enjoyable for me to write.
Why Spain as a location for this book?
Why Spain? Huh. Um, so when I was coming up with a new country in the middle of times, I was talking with my friend who was very, very brilliant on things like this. So I told him, okay, I need some countries in Europe. And he told me, he gave me a couple of options, but the three that stuck out to me were England, France, and Spain. I never wanted to do England because I don't know why. Just England wasn't the thing for me. So, but I liked France. I liked France's history with knights, so I went there. And the reason I chose them to oppose Spain was because they're so close together that it made a little bit of sense for me just to choose that. Yeah, I'd say that's why I chose that.
Yami, how did you come up with the title for this book? Not to give away too much.
Coming up with the title, okay. So I think I was like 8 months into the book. That's when I actually decided to actually start the publishing process before I even finished. The hardest thing was that they told me I need a title. And like that's where I stopped and thought, okay, I need a title. I want something that like sticks out, but like isn't like won't grow or become weird in the next like 6 months. Then I thought, what's associated with war? What's associated with all this? And then the first thing that pops in my head was like battle cries. That's not have a lot to do with war. Men screaming and charging at each other. Yeah. And then I thought, why not let me just put like descent into war? Because like with this whole thing, him going into Spain and them catching him, it's like they're this clearly see this as an act of war. So I can say they're descending into a war. That's how I chose the name. Yeah.
Yami, what's the main message that you would like viewers watching this interview to know and take away from your book?
I never really thought about that at first, or even when I finished the book, I had to actually reread it to understand the message as if I wasn't the author but the reader. For me, the message I would take is that courage. Courage is very hard, especially in the face of adversity. Running away to find your uncle who lives 2 days away is not an easy thing. It can be hard going to a foreign country to spy. It can be tough. I'd say adversity is always going to be there, challenges, tribulations, trials. But I'd say keep persevering, keep going. Uh-huh. And that's probably what's going to keep it going. Just have a discipline that tells you I can do this. That is the main message I would like my readers to understand from my book.
And do you plan on writing more books?
I ended it on a cliffhanger, so it would be criminal not to write more.
So there will be a sequel.
There will be a sequel. There has to be a sequel, yes.
More to come from Yami Kafungu. The book out now is Battle Cry Descent into War. It's available at writersrepublic.com, also amazon.com and barnesandnoble.com as well. Yami, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
And this is Speaking of Writers. This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards.